Serious. Garbage men of Reddit, have you ever found anything that was so sketchy you reported it to the police? What was it? I wasn't a driver, but a mechanic on garbage trucks for a large municipality. In my 4 years in that department, we had to dump fully loaded trucks on the ground 2 times and spread out the load looking for a body. Found one once. I decided not to look at it. I think I made the right choice. Yep, you did. Not a garbage guy, but I did work at a print shop and had to make copies of some court evidence photos once because the others on our staff couldn't look at them. The victim had stewed a bit in the trash before he got picked up, smushed, and then recovered. Ugh. Former sanitation department supervisor. My guys called me frantic one day after an explosion in the hopper of the truck. Thankfully, no one was injured, but I called the fire department and police always come on fire calls too. Turns out they had been watching the house we were in front of because the guy was cooking meth. He threw away some of the ingredients and the pressure when it compacted caused it to explode. The best part was the fact that the guy sat out front watching the show in a bathrobe. He eventually got dressed and came back out. When he was arrested, he had drugs in his pants. Apparently, he didn't own any pants without drugs in the pockets. As a recovering meth addict, I can absolutely see this happening. I found a residential can that was half full of Sudafed boxes. Easily a couple hundred boxes. I called it into the sheriff, who seemed completely uninterested. Probably because they either knew, or it was no great surprise, and they added it to a long list of reported meth houses. The only thing I brought to the police's attention were a bunch of brass World War I and World War II grave marker medallions I found in the recycle bins. Hopefully they went back to where they belonged. Why would you put those in the trash? Maybe whoever stole them felt guilty? I really don't know. Perhaps the scrapyard refused to take them. The bins were communal, so I couldn't tell the police exactly who stole them. I used to manage garbage men in Oakland, routinely found dead animals, remnants of large marijuana harvests, and weapons. Once, we found a rejected prosthetic limb. Also, pretty regularly, the FBI will have a trash company pick up the trash of someone under investigation so they can go through it. I spent some years in the trash and recycling industry. I remember a guy at a metal recycling center trying to cash in bronze grave headstones. He was arrested. Really strange things to throw out, seeing as prostheses are super expensive. NYC sanitation worker here. I've seen just about everything you can imagine. Dead animals such as dogs and cats are thrown out like everyday trash. We are required to just take them and the police are not notified at all. One time, my partner and I saw huge amounts of blood leaking from multiple trash bags that we had just thrown into the truck. We called our supervisor, and he looked at it and just said, "Keep going." It could have been anything. I've also seen plenty of drug paraphernalia being thrown out. Thousands of little plastic bags, scales, and plenty of white powder all over the place. One single incident sticks with me. Me and my partner were called to a location that was far away from our regular route one day. We met our supervisor at the location. I ask him, "What's up?" He points to a tree we were standing near. He says, "Look up." I look up and see a huge mass hanging in the tree about 20 feet off the ground. I couldn't really make out what it was, but it was dark and about 3 by 3 feet big. Turns out it was a huge pile of dead rats all tied together in a big mass. The police and fire department showed up about 5 minutes later. The fire department had to use a ladder to get to the branch and cut it down. When it hit the ground with a thud, the smell was so bad that us, the PD, and FD all backed up very quickly. Me and my partner had the pleasure to grab this thing and toss it into the truck. There had to be between 50 to 75 dead rats on this thing. We asked the police what it was all about, and they said most likely a form of religious sacrifice. I've been working for the sanitation department for 14 years, and that had to be the nastiest thing I have ever seen. I'll never forget the smell. Forgot to mention that it was probably about 90 degrees that day, and who knows how long that thing was hanging around. Never found any body parts in 35 years, but guns and antiques, and was requested by the ATF to pick up the trash at one home and pull around the corner and let the special agent in charge take the trash bags and put them in his black Chrysler 300 undercover car. This happened for several weeks in a row. Never did find out what they were looking for. I worked at a landfill for one summer and couldn't find anything grotesque, but did find a choir book from 1864 in a box in the dumpster. Took that for myself. I ran a large trash hauling company in South Georgia for 3 years. The amount of sketchy things thrown away is innumerable. I can't tell you how many times hospitals threw their bio-waste out to save on disposal fees. It got so bad, the landfill ended up reporting them. That's just the ones we saw. Who knew how many weren't caught? Wasn't criminal but should have been was the amount of good things Walmart and other retailers threw away. You return something due to a scratch, etc., and it doesn't sell, they have to throw it away. Tools, TVs, computers, clothes, toys, etc., some not even out of the box. All of it in working condition, but they had to throw it out to write it off, is what I was told. I was a garbage man while attending community college. I once found a litter of puppies in someone's garbage bag. I grabbed the bag as I normally would and tossed it in the back of the truck. A few moments later, I heard a soft crying that freaked me out once I realized it was coming from the truck. I ripped through a bunch of bags until I found 5 beagle puppies covered in something awful and crying. After regaining my composure, I found a big plastic bowl and filled it with newspaper and put all the puppies in and called the cops. Had to provide a statement and show up to a court hearing. The guy pleaded guilty and paid a fine, not sure how much. He said he believed they were all stillborn. Unfortunately, the puppies did not survive. Word spread pretty quick, and I know there were a great deal of people trying to adopt the puppies after they heard the story. I went to the court hearing and met a few people from the shelter there. Nobody knew what the guy looked like, just his name. We were all talking about the incident and basically saying how awful this guy was. The door opens and a lady says, "Puppy and garbage guy." The guy sitting right next to me gets up and walks into the courtroom. We found our dog in a cardboard box in the middle of an empty field in the middle of winter in southern Utah. My wife and I were walking on a super cold January day, and this box seemed odd. It had the 4 flaps folded over each other to keep the box closed, and I thought I heard something, so I popped the box open. And staring up at me was a probably 6 or 7-week-old black and white puppy. My wife picked him up and put him into her coat, and we had a dog. He lived 15 years and only went to the giant dog park in the sky a few years ago. Here's some photos, including the first photo we have of him. As a garbage truck mechanic, the most strange thing we found was the hamburger-like leftovers of a woman one of our trucks hit. All over the mud flaps and splattered all over the place. Driver didn't even notice, just came on back to the yard. We only found the truck after a manager heard a local news report of a garbage truck involved in a fatal accident with a pedestrian. It was a fun day. What happened to the driver? After a few months of therapy, he is back on route. Hell of a good guy. He couldn't feel running over a Honda Civic in a 50,000-pound garbage truck, let alone a person. No charges were pressed against him. The woman walked out into the truck while it was halfway past her. I've worked in a recycling plant for years. You wouldn't believe some of the things we find coming down the line. Last week, we found a garbage bag filled with rotten meat and loose needles with no caps. When this happens, we stop the conveyor and call the boss up to safely collect the hazardous material and take pictures. Based on some mail that was in the bag, management was able to find the exact place it was picked up from. I'm not sure there is much they can do about it, but they should be able to call the police for something like that. Should be considered assault. Safe to say, whoever put those needles in there knew damn well that another person would be handling it afterwards. One time, we found a guy's ashes in one of the standard plastic tubs funeral homes give out. His information was still on the side. When management contacted the family to try and have the tub picked up, it turned out that they threw the poor dude out on purpose. I used to do waste removal at a quadplex house that my great-uncle owned for extra cash anytime he had to evict a tenant, which was often because it was in a pretty strange area and the rent was cheap. Even still, you'd have drug addicts that would get enough money on their tax returns solely from having kids, and they'd be able to put down enough for a deposit and pay rent for a few months. Eventually, they'd run out of money and stop paying rent. They usually knew the tenant laws pretty well, and knew that as long as they paid utilities, that they'd be able to live there until the eviction process was up, and we'd show up with the sheriff. Unfortunately, we had one group of people that decided not to keep up with the utilities during the drawn-out eviction process and had their water, electric, and gas shut off. They lived in a small apartment for close to 2 months without running water. When we walked in, the place was wrecked. In their panic to take anything of value with them in the hour the sheriff gave them, they tossed everything around. We started in the living room, loading everything into a rental truck and worked our way back. By the time we got down the hall to the bedroom, the stink hit you. We opened the doors, and inside were rows upon rows of 2-liter bottles filled with piss. When the water stopped, they started cutting off the spout and would pee on the top. After it was filled, they would urinate on top of the feces until it was full. There were probably about 35 to 40 of these bottles in the master bedroom. Wondering why they didn't just do it in the toilet, then bring in water from the spigot to flush it? So were we. The toilet was clogged with dirty diapers. All in all, it was one of the grossest things I've ever seen. Luckily, my uncle wasn't a horrible person. He paid me and my uncle a full day's wage and called in a bio cleanup crew to handle it. The type of people you call to clean up murder and suicide scenes. Why does your uncle own these places if you guys know that people are eventually going to skip on the rent? The legal hassle has to eat up any profit he made, not to mention paying you guys. I worked at a rubbish and recycling transfer station. Thought I had a good score one day when I picked up a computer with some pretty good specs. Took it home and was having a ball investigating it. Until I found some porn. Pedophile porn. The missus reckons I've never gotten that angry so quick. I wrote down the file path and took it straight to the cop shop. Last I heard, there had been a few arrests. They used the computer's browser history and whatnot to make more than one arrest. Prick's lucky I didn't find him first. Could have gone differently. So you say you found this computer? Yes. So this computer which is in your possession is not yours? Mm-hmm. Please take a seat in this room and I'll have someone come back to you. Sound of door getting locked.